I got a message from someone a couple of days ago, and they told me you should go onto the H3H3 production subreddit and just look at the Zionism that festers in there. Look at the posts, read some, contend with it. So that's what I decided to do last night. I went on the subreddit last night. I just typed the word Zionism into it, and I was greeted with a bunch of posts of people who are part of the H3 subreddit, the H3 community, a community that claims to be pro-Palestine, claims to be even anti-Zionist or Zionist critical. And I decided, let's just look at what they're saying. What are their opinions on Zionism? What do they think it is? Do they think it's a salvageable idea? Do they think it's semi-good? Do they think it can be good, can be bad? What are the opinions over on H3H3 Productions on Reddit? And what I found was these people overwhelmingly support the idea of Zionism. The H3 subreddit is quite literally a Hasbara group chat that is a pro-Zionist propaganda group chat. I'm gonna pull up some of the posts that I collected last night and we can get into it. Again, I did not spend that much time. I don't care that much about these people. I just thought, you know what? Someone told me to do this. I'll try it. I go on, I type Zionism into the search bar. I'm not the greatest Redditor, I'll be honest. I'm not that well versed with how the infrastructure works over there. So I type it in, and this is the post that I am first greeted with. It says, FYI, a Zionist is just someone who thinks the state of Israel should exist. It has nothing to do with the two-state solution, the West Bank, or the non-existence of a Palestinian state. Google AI is correct, and it's a hyper-online group of people distorting a pretty well-established word to mean something it doesn't. Biden, Obama, Bernie Sanders, all Zionists. It's Kahanists or settlers that are the proper labels for these extremists. Google AI is correct, boys and girls and NBs. All of the historians who have thrown their hat in the ring, all of the academia and scholarly contributions to the field, fuck all that. Google AI is in town. Now, first thing that strikes me about this post is the desperation to separate Zionism from something that is worse. There's Zionism over here, and that's not necessarily the issue, but what's over here, Kahanism, settlers, that's the issue. But settlers, Kahanism, those are the logical conclusion of the Zionist project, a project predicated on settling a land where Jewish people are not naturally a majority. The whole purpose of the project is to settle a predominantly Arab land and turn it into a Jewish state. So let's contend with this point by point. A Zionist is just someone who thinks the state of Israel should exist. People will frame it this way. They'll try and frame it as something that is benign. They'll say, all a Zionist believes is that Israel should exist. Jewish people should have a homeland somewhere. That's what they'll say it. Now, let's be very specific about what Zionism asks of us. It doesn't just ask for a Jewish state in the abstract. That's not what it asks for. It asks for a Jewish state specifically in Palestine. That's where it asks of the Jewish state to be built. Then we start to dig a little further. What are the problems with that? Well, first and foremost, Palestine was already populated. It's kind of an important part. And the demographics of Palestine prior to Zionism, prior to specifically the 47 partition plan, UNGA Resolution 181, Jewish people made up less than a third of the population. And that was even including all of the Zionist immigration from Europe at the time. They still only made up a third of the population. Now, there is a difference, and this is a point that I've brought up many, many times. There is a difference between a refugee or an immigrant and a settler. The Jewish people who lived in Palestine, who are Palestinian Jews, who lived in Palestine prior to the advent of Zionism, those people are indigenous to Palestine. They're Palestinian. They're Jewish Palestinians. There is a difference between them, obviously, and there is a difference between immigrants or refugees. If the Jewish people who came from Europe went to Palestine with the intention of joining the existing polity that already existed in Palestine, as opposed to wanting to replace it, which they did, that wouldn't necessarily be an issue. Immigration takes place all of the time. That's not necessarily the issue. The issue is these aliyahs, specifically, the second aliyah is where it got really bad. The goal there was to ostracize the indigenous Palestinians, cut them out of the labor market. There was something called the conquest of the labor market. Cut these people, the indigenous people, out of the labor market. Bar their goods from the market so that you couldn't sell them. Use instruments such as the Histadrut, which was the Zionist Trade Union Federation, to ostracize and subjugate the indigenous Palestinians. That is very different than going to Palestine to join the existing polity. So that's on one hand. And then closer we get to the partition, closer we get to the declaration of Israel's independence and the Nakba, what ends up happening is the Zionists move away from just subjugation and move towards organized mass expulsions, okay? Violence, ethnic cleansing. So to say that a Zionist is just someone who thinks the state of Israel should exist, well, what is the state of Israel? The state of Israel is a Jewish state that is maintained. A Jewish demographic majority is maintained through discriminatory immigration and violence and expulsions and ethnic cleansings to create a Jewish state in a land where Jewish people are not naturally a majority. In order to get that reality, in order to create that on the ground, you need to engage in ethnic cleansings and discriminatory immigration. And this is not conspiracy. We've seen this. How do you think Israel was created? But again, if you ask Ethan Klein, he would say that the Palestinians just left because Arab leaders told them to.
It was the invading fucking Arab armies that told the Palestinians to leave and come back when the war was over.
Which is a right-wing Zionist narrative that even Benny Morris, who is a piece of shit Zionist, will say that's not true. That didn't happen. Shlomo Ben-Ami, Zionist, says that's not true. But H3H3 Productions, Ethan Klein and his sycophants, no, they think that that's true. They are to the right of Shlomo Ben-Ami and Benny Morris. Anyway, this is something you'll see come up shortly when we go over some more of the posts in this subreddit. What they are desperate to do is to pin all of the blame on the right-wing Zionists, on the Kahanists, on the settlers, and not Zionism as a whole. It's almost as though they believe that these things, Kahanists and settlers, are not inextricably linked to Zionism, are not the logical conclusion of an ethno-supremacist project, because that's what Zionism is in all of its flavors and variations. It's ethno-supremacist. The creation of a Jewish state with a permanent Jewish demographic majority on a land where Jewish people are not naturally a majority. How do you create that reality without discriminatory immigration laws and ethnic cleansings? How do you do that? Because that's what happened. That's what we saw happen. The last thing I want to say about this post, which is trying to purport that Zionism is not a bad word. It shouldn't be a bad word. It's just someone who thinks the state of Israel should exist. I really want to drive this point home. Zionism was always understood to be colonialism. It was always understood to be that. That's why Theodore Herzl reached out to Cecil Rhodes and asked for his help when it came to Zionism and described Zionism as, quote, something colonial. That's why the agencies involved in the earlier stages of Zionism called themselves openly colonial agencies. Jabotinsky, the author of The Iron Wall, if you read The Iron Wall, he says, what we are doing right now is colonialism, and the Arabs have every right to act the way they are acting. They are responding rationally in the face of colonialism. That's what Jabotinsky says. So the leading figures of Zionism will openly call it colonialism. That's not a secret. You know, forgive this tangent, but I feel like you guys will find this interesting. Harley Morenstein, who is, you know, the co-host of Ethan Klein's After Dark show with Guam, shout out my girl Guam. But Harley Morenstein, he and I got into a spat on Twitter a couple months back, and he was going to call into No Politic Here to debate Zionism with me. Now, I'm not a debate bro, okay? I've never purported to be one, but I really wanted to have this conversation with him. And as we are conversing, as we are trying to set up this potential conversation, have him come on, he wanted as a prerequisite that we agreed on a neutral definition of Zionism. And I couldn't do that because I can't say, well, dude, okay, I'll agree with you now that it's a neutral thing, and then when we start talking, I'm going to have to go back on that because I don't believe Zionism is a neutral word. I don't believe that it's a neutral ideology. I think it's morally reprehensible. I can't tell you that I believe it's neutral and then go back on my word because you're going to feel like I lied to you. So we never ended up doing that. And another thing that he brought up to me, another point that he brought up to me, because I mentioned to him that all of the, leaders of Zionism, the important figures of Zionism, openly admitted that Zionism was colonialism. And what he said to me was, well, colonialism didn't yet have a negative connotation. That's what he said to me. And this is a talking point that I've heard other Zionists bring up as well. It's almost as though they're like in some group chat with each other and they're sharing these talking points. But my response to that would be, at what point would you consider colonialism to be a negative thing? Because from the perspective of its victims, it always was. What is colonialism? It's the imposition of one's will on a people that are subjugated, who are exploited, who are extracted for the benefit of the metropole. That's what makes colonialism so terrible. And then there's also settler colonialism, which is terrible because what it does is it replaces an existing society so that settlers from the metropole can create what they deem to be a more superior society. These movements colonialism, traditional or settler, involve mass casualty events or extreme exploitation. That is what makes colonialism bad. So just because the people carrying out colonialism were yet to attach a negative connotation to it, all that really does is it highlights how one applies different sets of standards to the colonialist, to the Westerner, to the one imposing his will on the other. Because from the perspective of the person being colonized, do you really need to wait until there's a negative connotation attached there? That person would have always been able to tell you, this is negative, this is bad, because it's exploiting me, it's killing me. So just because some Europeans were yet to attach a negative connotation to what they were doing is not an argument, because the people on the receiving end of that barbarity could have always told you it was negative. That's the first point. But the second point is, at what point can we say that colonialism acquired a negative connotation? I mean, would you argue that like anything past the 40s, it's still fair to say that colonialism doesn't have a bad connotation yet? Because by that point, like we've seen the settler colonialism of Algeria, we've seen it all over Africa, all over the global south. You're telling me that by the 1940s, you can't tell that colonialism is a bad thing, that it harms people? Because if you can concede the point that, yeah, by the 1940s, it's ridiculous to claim that colonialism doesn't have a negative connotation, then how do you answer for the 1942 Biltmore Conference, where Zionists openly bragged that they had written a notable page in the history of colonization? They did that in 1942. So you can't make the argument that in 1942, they didn't have a negative connotation attached to colonialism yet. Anyway, I'm on a bit of a tangent. Just so you know, the Nazis didn't attach a negative connotation to what they were doing. That doesn't change the fact that what they were doing was fucked up. Ridiculous. But this is kind of what liberal Zionists in particular have to present, have to go along with. They have to try to convince you that Zionism in and of itself, Zionism as an idea, is neither good or bad, but how it's applied is either good or bad. But that leaves out of the equation the fact that in order to create and uphold the state of Israel, everything that I mentioned earlier, the expulsions and the discriminatory immigration laws, need to take place. Why is it that a Jewish person born absolutely anywhere in the world can go to Israel, but a Palestinian born in Palestine can't return? That's what makes Israel Israel. What about the 2018 nation state law that literally says Jews have the right to national self-determination and only Jews have that right? Exclusively Jews have that right. What about the 1958 basic law that states that if you plan to change the character of Israel from being a Jewish ethno-state, you can no longer run as a politician or a party? That's an apartheid law. You're upholding racial domination through laws in this case. That's apartheid. Let's move on to the next post. Okay. So I did not watch this interview with ContraPoints. You would actually have to commence some sort of torture in order for me to watch this of my own will. But I did come across this clip last night as I was searching the H3 subreddit about Zionism. So let's give this a watch.
An important part of the mindset of the IDF and of Kahanism, or what do you want to call it in general.
Yeah.
You see how she's doing this as well? She's trying to force this separation between Kahanism and Zionism. You know, there's this thing that Kahana used to always say. He would say, I'm saying what you all think. I'm saying what you all think. It's interesting to try and force this separation because what it does is it whitewashes Zionism and it gives it a lifeline, especially right now when the atmosphere in the West, the political climate is turning so far against Zionism. It's people like this, it's the liberal Zionists that are offering Zionism a lifeline. They're the ones who do that. They say, all of these wacky characters, the Smotrich, the Ben-Gavirs, the Kahana, that's a different thing. But what I defend is just the right for Jewish people to have a homeland on land that they ethnically cleansed and maintain their demographic on by discriminatory immigration laws. That's still bad. And it's because of that foundation that figures like Kahana can exist. It's because of that foundation.
The idea of like, look, Jews have been victimized for 2,000 years. We will always be victimized. We will always be besieged. We'll always be hated. And the only way for us to survive is to fight back.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I was going to say about this, if you constantly just put all of the blame on right-wing Zionists, at a certain point, you're going to have to answer for the fact that a lot of the so-called liberal Zionists have done equally bad shit in a lot of instances. What about Golda Meir? Golda Meir is like a known intransigent. We were talking about Avi Shlaim's The Iron Wall. If you go to chapter 7 of that book, there's a subheading and a subchapter called Golda the Intransigent, and it goes over the War of Attrition, it goes over the Yom Kippur War, and it goes over how Golda Meir was a hawk and intransigent, extremely intransigent. And she is the liberal darling of the liberal Zionists. She was a monster. So this analysis that blames everything on Kahanists and settlers, how do you hold that same ire toward a figure like Golda Meir, who deserves it, if your entire analysis is predicated on hyper-focusing on settlers or Kahanists, as if they're the big issue right now? They're not the big issue right now. Zionism as a whole is a big issue right now, and liberal Zionists like ContraPoints, who offer it a lifeline, are arguably an even bigger issue, because anybody can look at Kahana and be like, this guy's a fucking monster, this guy's an idiot. But when people like ContraPoints whitewash Zionism, that is, in certain ways, more dangerous, because it obfuscates the reality. It convinces people that yes, Zionism, which is an inherently ethno-supremacist ideology, can exist in certain ways, in certain variations, when it absolutely can't. It can't. It's an ethno-supremacist ideology that needs to be eradicated in all of its forms. But people like Contra are the ones that preclude that reality from ever taking place. You know, what about Rabin? What about Yitzhak Rabin, the infamous break their bones Yitzhak Rabin peace dove, right? During the First Intifada, he gave the order to break the bones of Palestinian protesters. This is your peace guy? This is your liberal Zionist? What about the fact that when he took over from Yitzhak Shamir, he kept a Likud figure as the head of peace talks in 1992, after it was very clear that Shamir and Likud were intransigent, were not interested in peace with the Palestinians? If Yitzhak Rabin was genuinely interested in peace, why the fuck would he keep a Likud figure as the head of the delegation for peace talks with the Palestinians? That makes no sense. What about Ehud Barak? Ehud Barak is another peace prime minister who built more settlements in his nearly 2-year term than Netanyahu did in the 3 years prior. Okay? In his opening speech when he got elected, the first thing he said was, under no circumstances are we withdrawing to the pre-67 borders. Okay? He said, we are going to annex East Jerusalem in perpetuity. Okay? This is your fucking liberal dove, bro. What about Shimon Peres, co-architect of the Oslo peace process, who, when he was asked in a meeting with editors from Newsweek if a Palestinian state would be the eventual outcome of Oslo 2 to be specific, Shimon Peres said no. So it's not just the right-wingers that are intransigent, it's all of them, because their entire project is predicated on upholding the supremacy of their ethno-religious group. That's what makes it harmful. That's why it's a malignant ideology.
1,000 years, we will always be victimized, we will always be besieged, we will always be hated. And the only way for us to survive is to fight back. That's how they think, right? And that's why all of this seems justified. Now I have this other worry, and this is where I've caused myself to become an arch villain of the online left recently, is I also worry that there'll be a backlash to that as well.
And backlash to what?
Well, a backlash to the visible spectacle of Israel's ethnic cleansing.
Am I misunderstanding what she's saying here? Is she saying that she's worried that Israel's behavior is going to draw condemnations of it, and she's worried about the image of the state of Israel? Is that what she's saying? Am I misunderstanding this?
What?
Well, a backlash to the visible spectacle of Israel's ethnic cleansing, which kind of, I think, has led many people to have an almost obsessive fixation on Israel and Zionism as like the great Satan.
They just did a genocide. Oh.
Right. Which maybe I'm overactive in my anxiety about it, but maybe I'm not. I mean, I think that some people are going to want to retaliate for...
The concern that she is bringing to the table right now is that Israel may have to face repercussions for the fact that it just committed a genocide. Why are you even giving a fuck about this right now? How is that even close to the top of your priorities? Who cares? They just committed a genocide, and you're worried about them having to face some consequences for it or some unsavory opinions? Obviously, people are going to be fucking mad at Israel. People are not going to like that. Why is this even close to the top of your priorities to think, oh, fuck, I really hope people don't get super anti-Israel now? Dude, gives a fuck. They should be anti-Israel because of this. They should have been anti-Israel before this. The entirety of the state of Israel, the entire history of the state of Israel is indefensible. It's indefensible.
The hundreds of videos they've seen of children being blown up. Some people are going to want to retaliate for the hundreds of videos they've seen of children being blown up. That sort of worries me, not just for the victims of the retaliation, but for the continued escalation of violence that it implies. I don't have an answer. I don't know what to do about it. It's just a thing I'm watching like a train wreck.
So if she understands that Zionism, the state of Israel, is creating this cycle of perpetual hatreds? Why would she not just say, okay, we need to abandon this project in its entirety? She's understanding that the culprit here, the original starting point, is Israel's behavior, and it sends people into these cycles of hatred and animosity because what it is doing is ethnic cleansing and genocide. Obviously, that's going to spark animosity and hatred. Then why not just try and can the project? Why try to save it? Why try to make this distinction and say, well, Zionism in and of itself is not necessarily bad, but the Zionists, those are bad. Why? There's nothing salvageable about this project.
In the same way that I think on October 7th, when that news came in, of course, I was horrified by the attack itself and the victims of the attack, but also was overwhelmed by fear of what Israel was going to do next, which would likely be worse. Is how I felt at the time. It has been. And it has been. Yeah.
Wow. I don't understand how so much pro-Israel propaganda can be posted in this online community, and then when you call Ethan a Zionist for fostering this behavior and participating in it, he's confused. He's like, I'm pro-Palestine. Brother, if you were pro-Palestine, these would not be the discussions taking place in your communities.
An important part of the mindset of the IDF and of Kahanism, or what do you want to call it in general?
Yeah.
The idea of like, look, Jews have been victimized for 2,000 years. We will always be victimized. We will always be besieged. We'll always be hated. And the only way for us to survive is to fight back. Mm-hmm. That's how they think, right? And that's why all of this seems justified.
It's hard to tell in this clip because I don't know the context prior to this, but is she playing devil's advocate for that idea? Is she playing devil's advocate for the idea that Jewish people are going to be unable to integrate into other societies, and that's why they need this strong military presence? Is that what she's doing? Because if that's the case, that's also a pretty ridiculous line of argument. Like, you'll hear these arguments all the time. You'll say, well, Jewish people needed Israel. They had to go there because they were being persecuted. And they were being persecuted. But if you want to look at the numbers, you want to actually sit down and look at this. After the Holocaust, of the remaining 3 million Jewish people in Europe who survived, how many do you think went to Palestine? Only 10% went to Palestine. Of the Jewish people who were fleeing Eastern Europe, the pogroms in Eastern Europe, out of all of the people that were fleeing those pogroms, less than 10% of them went to Palestine and made the second Aliyah. Less than 10%. So what this means is the majority of Jewish people fleeing discrimination and persecution went anywhere but Palestine. What this line of argument does is it also takes for granted the idea that Jewish people had to go and subjugate other unrelated people because of their oppression and their persecution. That doesn't make much sense. So yeah, no reasonable person denies the fact that Jewish people were horrifically persecuted, especially in Europe. No reasonable person denies that fact. But what we do take issue with is using that fact to excuse Jewish oppression of other people, of other unrelated groups of people, especially when it just didn't have to be that way. The Jewish people that remained in Europe, that didn't go to Palestine, which was the vast majority of them, by the way, the ones surviving after the Holocaust, the vast majority of them didn't go to Palestine. And they were fine. They were fine. They didn't have to go and oppress an unrelated group of people to be safe. Would this argument hold true for Romani people who were also persecuted during the Holocaust in very similar ways? Do they get an ethno-state in northern India? I'm sure that they can make probably an even stronger ancestral claim to a piece of land in northern India than Ashkenazi Jewish people can to Palestine. Should we excuse that behavior if they chose to do that? It's really, really despicable that the thing that she seems to care about the most in this clip is the image of Israel after it conducted a genocide, as opposed to being preoccupied with wanting to end Zionism in its entirety, which any reasonable person right now should think this project has gone too far. It's been a failure. We need to remedy this. But no, her main concern is, how can I keep this alive? What if I start a new YouTube channel and I call it Sandinista Points, and I come for her throne and I do like 25 costume changes throughout the span of like a 3-hour video, and I only put one video out every 17 years, and I make hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on Patreon, and just complain about leftists all fucking day? You gotta pour milk on Netanyahu if you do. First thing I will do is pour milk on Netanyahu. This is another post on their subreddit that I found, and it's Ben Shapiro saying, Hassan Piker from Tiananmen Square said that he has no American patriotism in his heart. Based. And then Hassan replying saying, I'm not a patriotic person in general. You are patriotic for Israel first and foremost. And whoever posted this to the H3 subreddit said just flat out anti-Semitism. Whether you hate Ben Shapiro or not, this is full-blown anti-Semitism. Saying Ben Shapiro, whose entire brand is dick-riding the state of Israel and siding with the state of Israel above all of the time, no matter what, is Israel first, is not anti-Semitic. How the fuck is it anti-Semitic? It's so obvious that Ben Shapiro loves the state of Israel. That is where his priorities lie. He loves it. He's fucking like semi-open about this. It's actually so unbelievable that I think people in the comments of this post are like, dude, like Ben Shapiro's pretty uncontroversially obsessed with Israel. I think the issue is that it backs up the dual loyalty trope. Hassan is not making the dual loyalty argument here. If Ben Shapiro wants to play into anti-Semitic tropes by being so obsessed with Israel first and foremost, that's him in the wrong. Okay, there we go. Anti-Zionist is not anti-Semitism. Same energy as I'm not racist. I'm anti-crime from people who assume every person of color is a criminal. Yo, do you know how racist you have to be to think up this analogy and then post it? That's crazy. So the argument here is that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. That's the argument that this person made in like the sloppiest way ever. I mean, if your argument is that Zionism is Judaism, that's the argument that you cannot be anti-Israel without being anti-Judaism, and therefore Israel and Zionism are the same thing as Judaism. That just doesn't make any sense, right? Like Judaism has been around for thousands of years. Zionism came about in like the 1800s, late 1800s. So, I mean, the idea that they're inextricably linked, just looking at the timeline, that's wrong. There's also the fact that the majority of Jewish people, when Zionism was a burgeoning idea, thought poorly of it. They didn't consider themselves Zionists. They thought, yeah, no, I'm not fucking with this shit. I mean, even Theodor Herzl, he would say when he was trying to sell his Zionist project, he goes, the anti-Semites will become our most dependable friends. The idea being that the more anti-Semitic people are, the more he could justify his Jewish ethno-state on the grounds of, oh, well, this is where Jewish people have to go to be safe. Balfour Declaration was written by anti-Semites, and there was an individual in the British cabinet who opposed the Balfour Declaration. He said this actually puts Jews in harm's way, and his name was Edwin Montagu, and he was the only Jew in the British cabinet. Now, I don't really like going down this line of argument because I don't like to make the argument that, oh, Zionism is actually bad for Jewish people. Look at what it does. It sparks anti-Semitism. It does spark anti-Semitism in ways, it does. But I don't like going down this line of argument because Jewish people extract so many more benefits at the expense of Palestinians from Zionism than they lose because of Zionism. So I don't like this idea that, oh, Zionism is actually bad for Jewish people. In the long run, you could make the argument that it is bad because, you know, it forces them to be ethno-supremacists and it causes a lot of backlash. But that line of argument does not contend with the fact that materially, right now, at the expense of Palestinians, Jewish people, no matter where they are born in the world, can extract benefits at the expense of the indigenous people who they subjugate in Israel. That's just a fact. Like, to make it seem as though Zionism is bad for Jewish people, well, that implies if it wasn't bad for Jewish people, then it would be okay. And that's not true. That's not what I believe. I believe that Zionism would always be bad, right? The implication there is that if Zionism had no drawbacks whatsoever for Jewish people, then it would be acceptable. And that's not true. It's bad. It's unacceptable because it harms and kills Palestinians. That should be the focal point of the argumentation that we make, not necessarily that, oh, Zionism is bad for Jewish people. In the long run, yeah, it sparks anti-Semitism. It is. At the very least, you could say that it forces people to give up on their humanity to adopt this ethno-supremacist ideology. That is not good, right? That is not good. But materially, Jewish people benefit substantially from Zionism and Israel. What else do we got here? Oh, this one's so funny, dude. You guys are gonna love this one. Being labeled a Zionist is the new age McCarthyism, bro. McCarthyism. McCarthy dedicated a big chunk of his career labeling anyone that slightly differed from his political opinion as a communist. He ruined hundreds of people's lives. Many actors were blacklisted from Hollywood from his claims. Careers were ruined, people were socially ostracized, and there was widespread fear of speaking out against the mainstream narrative. Many people are even scared to associate with anyone even suspected of being communist. Dude, how do you not see that this applies to falsely labeling people anti-Semites for criticizing Israel? It applies to that phenomenon way better than it does to being labeled Zionist and then losing opportunities because of it. If you are labeled a Zionist, realistically, where are you losing opportunities? Are you getting fired from your job for being a Zionist? Are you not making it into political office for being a Zionist? Or are you being rewarded in political office for being a Zionist? What about in Hollywood? What about in all of these prestigious and elite fields? Being a Zionist is a benefit there. What the fuck are you talking about? This is what happens when your entire life is just predicated on scrolling on fucking Twitter all day. On Twitter, that's where being called a Zionist, like, okay, fuck, you're gonna get ostracized. But in the real world right now, unfortunately, If you call yourself a Zionist and you're in Hollywood or you're in political office or you're in any of the higher echelons of society, are you going to get ostracized for being a Zionist? You should, but are you going to today, right now? No, you're not. In fact, if you loudly and proudly proclaim that you are anti-Zionist, that is a threat to your career. That is a threat to your career. Jesus Christ, if you're Palestinian and you're just speaking out about your plight, you could be fucking arrested by ICE in America for no reason, wrongfully detained like Mahmoud Khalil. This is a guy, what did he do? He was accused of being a terrorist. That's way more like McCarthyism than whatever the fuck this person is trying to put forth. Mahmoud Khalil was branded as a terrorist or a terrorist apologist, and all he did was speak about the plight of his people. He didn't do anything wrong. He didn't do any terrorist shit. If Mahmoud Khalil was a Zionist, do you think everything that happened to him would have happened to him? Absolutely not. That happened precisely because he wasn't a Zionist. Unbelievable. This is the result of creating a community predicated on whitewashing and ethno-supremacist ideology. You end up getting fucking insane brain rot like this all over your community. These are the highbrow conversations that are taking place over in the H3 cinematic universe. I mean, you guys know I worked in the music industry before I started YouTube. Me being anti-Zionist cost me way more connections than anything. I've never seen people fucking cut me off so quickly, ever, in anything, in any aspect of my life. People that I've worked with for years, who are on my team, who funded parts of my albums, were like, never talking to this guy again. Gal Gadot and Sacha Baron Cohen still get to work, so clearly it's not the case. Absolutely. And Sacha Baron Cohen is like bloodthirsty, bro. He is so much of a Zionist. He's so extremely racist. Here's another thing. Here's another. This will be the last one. They're so desperate to find a neutral definition of Zionism. They found this random like history textbook that defines Zionism. Political movement advocating the reestablishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. First of all, this definition alone is not neutral, because how do you create a Jewish homeland in Palestine? A land that is not Jewish, is not a Jewish land. It's predominantly Arab land. So how do you reestablish a Jewish homeland in Palestine without expelling the people who don't fit the fabric that you're trying to create your state with? What do you do about those people? You expel them, you prevent them from coming back to where you expelled them from. You do both. They work in tandem. That's how Israel was formed. That's part and parcel of the deal that's in the fabric of Zionism. You cannot have Zionism. You cannot have the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine without subjugating or eliminating the elements that run contrary to that Jewish character. How do you do it? So this definition in and of itself is not neutral, despite the fact that the author of this post probably thinks it is. Dog, whose textbook is this, bro? This is the ContraPoints press. She started her own publishing company, and now they're pumping out textbooks. Imagine defending European settler colonialism in a similar way by saying like it's a political movement to establish a white homeland in the Americas or Australia or South Africa. What's the difference? That's still bad. Like the lands that they're planning to settle and create their polity on top of, their political project on top of, those are not white. Those are not white countries, white lands. So you're just going to replace that and create your white project there. Describing Zionism that way is the same thing, like creating a Jewish homeland in Palestine. What's the difference between saying that and saying, well, I'm a conquistador and I want to create a white homeland on Hispaniola? It's the difference. Goodness. All right, we're gonna end this segment now.